for the prize we have striven, after our labors are o'er. Rest to our souls will be given on the eternal shore. Home of the soul, beautiful home, there we shall rest, never to roam, free from all care, happy and bright. Jesus is there, He is the light. Oft in the storm, lonely are we, sighing for home, longing for Thee. Beautiful home of the ransom beside the crystal sea, the crystal sea. Yes, a sweet rest is remaining for the true children of God, where there will be no complaining, never a chastening rod. Home of the soul, beautiful home, there we shall rest, never to roam, free from all care, happy and bright. Jesus is there, He is the light. Oft in the storm, lonely are we, sighing for home, longing for Thee. Beautiful home of the ransom beside the crystal sea, the crystal sea. Soon the bright homeland adorning, we shall behold the glad dawn. Lean on the Lord till the morning, trust till the night has gone. Home of the soul, beautiful home, there we shall rest, never to roam, free from all care, happy and bright. Jesus is there, He is the light. Oft in the storm, lonely are we, sighing for home, longing for Thee. Beautiful home of the ransom beside the crystal sea, the crystal sea.
We continue in our lessons around the Sermon on the Mount, the mountain plateau, or as some have seen, not far, Brother J.W. McGarvey says, from the area of Capernaum. Tonight we're going to be looking at subdivision H, which covers Matthew chapter 7 through 11. Last week we were looking at the first part of the scripture of this chapter, where it was talking about being critically judgmental in the things that we do. And so as we look here this evening, we're going to continue to be discussing some of those concepts and ideas, beginning, as we said, in Matthew 7 and verse 7 through 11. Jesus, as He continues on, says, "Ask, and it shall be given you. Seek, and ye shall find. Knock, and it shall be opened unto you. For everyone that asketh receiveth, and he that seeketh findeth, and to him that knocketh it shall be opened. For what man is there of you, if his son ask for a loaf, will give him a stone, or if he shall ask for a fish, shall give him a serpent? If ye then, being evil, know how to give good gifts unto your children, how much more shall your Father who is in heaven give good things to them that ask Him?" Now that's the first section, or the first part there, and we're going to look at that. This is a continuation of some of Jesus' teaching earlier. We had been studying and saw in the Sermon on the Mount that Jesus was talking about prayer, and more or less public prayer. Here He goes into our asking and receiving and seeking according to the will of God. And so as we look here this evening, He says, "Ask, and it shall be given you. Seek, and you shall find. Knock, and it shall be opened unto you. Then he says, everyone that asketh receiveth, and he that seeketh findeth, and to him that knocketh shall it be opened. Now, as we look at this many times in the religious world, we find individuals using these type of verses for a so-called prosperity gospel, and anything you ask for, you're going to get if you ask in faith. And so just like the passages on being overly judgmental, critical in that sense, we come to these particular verses, and Jesus clarifies part of what he is saying, and the New Testament writers further clarify that. When he says in verse 8, for everyone that asketh receiveth, and he that seeketh findeth, and to him that knocketh shall be opened, he does clarify later on in verse 9 who this everyone is. Is it everyone, or is it everyone of a particular group of individuals? And of course, as we look in verse 9, it talks about here, if a child was to ask, what man or father is there if your son would ask a loaf, would give him a stone? Or if he asked for fish, would give him a serpent? And so then he talks about, if you being evil know how to give good things unto your children, how much more shall your Father who is in heaven give good things to them that ask him? And so a quick reading off the top would seem to imply that everything is just okay and wonderful and fine here, and that Jesus is telling his disciples that all they have to do is ask for something and look for it, seek it out, and they're going to get everything of their heart's desire. And when he begins to clarify that, we come to know that that's not necessarily the case, because not only, as Jesus is talking here, will you not give a stone for a loaf, parents aren't going to give children things that they know are not good for them or might be harmful to them. And so it becomes important that we understand some of the concepts that go along with this. And so the first part, verse 7, where he says, ask and it shall be given you, seek and you shall find, knock and it shall be opened unto you. The idea there in that verse, as I have studied and understand it, is the concept of an ongoing idea. That is, to ask and keep asking, to seek and keep seeking, to knock and keep knocking. And so as we look at these verses and we think about what he's saying or showing to us, we understand that there is, first of all, a sincerity that goes with what Jesus is talking about here. There is a sense that which just not asking in passing, but it's asking in the sense that this is something that we earnestly desire, something that we are seeking. And when we add this to the fact that Jesus earlier had said that our Father has knowledge, knows what we have need of before we even ask, when he was giving what we know or what we think of as the Lord's Prayer. And so we know that the Father already knows what we have need of before we ask, back in Matthew 6. And so in this sense, it's just the fact that God wants us to put forth an effort But that also has to be clarified. James tells us in James 1, in verse 6 and 7, that if we're going to ask God for anything, it requires that we be focused, and it requires the fact that we not ask doubting. Because if we ask doubting, well, I don't really know whether God's would do this for me or not. A double-minded man, James says, is unstable in all of his ways. And he said that as far as people asking for wisdom or praying for wisdom. If you want wisdom, ask God, who giveth to all men liberally and upbraideth not, and it'll be given you. But again, ask in faith, not doubting. And so there is a part of prayer that falls into the area that requires faith. In the early part of Luke 18, Jesus spoke a parable that men ought to always pray and not to faint. And I'm not going to go into the whole deal of that, but it did talk about the persistence of this woman to this judge. Though he didn't fear God or man, he, again, because of her persistence, her faith in desiring that, constantly asking, seeking, knocking. That's the premise in that parable. And again, he talks about the judge giving in because of her persistence, her determination, her commitment to that. And at the end of that, Jesus says, nevertheless, when the Son of Man cometh, shall he find faith upon the earth? And so Jesus links faith with prayer. And is that prayer backed up with that faith in believing that what God has, again, or what we're asking God for, He would be willing to give us those things. 1 John 5:14, there he also gives, John gives us a promise that we know that we have the things that we ask of Him if we ask according to His will. We know that He will consider that. And so when we look at those aspects in light of what Jesus is saying, there is the matter of faith, believing, and there is the sense also of asking for the thing that we have need of. Now, there's an interesting statement that he has here. If your son asks for a loaf, will you give him a stone? If he's hungry and he asks for a rock, is that what you're going to give him? What are you going to do? You're going to give him something that he can eat. If he wants to wrestle a pit viper because he's hungry, wouldn't you rather have this fish instead? The fish isn't quite as fierce, ferocious, or deadly as the viper. And so that's what Jesus says this way is true. If your son asks for a loaf, you're not going to give him a stone, no matter how much it looks like one. We've talked about before when Jesus was tempted of the serpent while he was in the wilderness. He asked him, or in tempting him, he says, if you be the Son of God, turn these stones into bread. Sometimes some of these creek stones that have been tossed and tumbled, they may take on an appearance of a nice, well-baked roll or loaf of bread, but it's not. And while it may look like that, so we know the difference. And so we take into consideration what it is that they need. No matter what they ask for, you take into consideration what they have need of. And so this is what Jesus is saying. And so we have to also, when we ask and we seek and we knock, sometimes our faith is tested by God saying, not now. He doesn't say no, and he doesn't say yes, but he just says not now. And not now is probably one of the hardest things. When you get a definite answer of no or yes, then that pretty much settles it. But not now, that's a whole different story. Well, if not now, when? Well, when I'm ready. When I'm ready, then we'll get there. And so that's why we have this concept or that idea that seems to be built into this: ask and keep asking. We do not know, what God's answer may ultimately be. And, we may be asking for a serpent when we should be asking for a fish. And so when we don't get the serpent, we may be disappointed. But we're asking for something that is not really what we're in need of. And so we get the fish instead of the serpent, just like we wouldn't give them the serpent when they ask for the fish. And so this goes both ways. But it has to be in accordance to God's will, and it has to be in accordance to faith. And since God already knows, you see, this is the whole thing where faith comes in. God already knows. When you need 4 new tires for your car, you think God knows that? You think God knows when the tread's coming through, the belt's coming through on your tire? You think God already knows that? You wouldn't be much of a God if He didn't, right? I mean, if you know it, then surely He can know it. And He probably knew it before you even knew it. I'm pretty sure He knew it before you even knew it. And so He already knows what you have need of. That your car's in the shop and the mechanic calls and says, well, I thought it was going to be this, but it's going to be a little bit more expensive than what I thought. And that seems to be the way it works in the shop anyway. You're told one thing, and then they pull it in the shop and pop open the hood and start taking things apart. And then, that it's going to need this and it's going to need that. And we found this. But God already knew that. And so it's nothing that's going to take God by surprise. We have those people in theology that kind of have this, and I call it ambush theology. That is, God sent Jesus into the world to establish His kingdom, but the Jews rejected Him, the Romans killed Him, and so God gave us the church to make do until He could later establish the kingdom. And again, if that makes sense to some people, which apparently it must, it doesn't make any sense to me. The God who is all-knowing doesn't know how the Jews are going to react to His Son. The God who's all-knowing doesn't know what the Romans are going to do to His Son. Of course He does. He has all those prophecies in the Old Testament. He didn't get surprised. And so God is not surprised. As Jesus said, He knows what we have need of. But then there comes a matter of pride. Sometimes pride gets in the way. Sometimes people will not humble themselves before God. Sometimes people try to fix it themselves, and then when they can't get it fixed, then they ask God's help. They try to put a Band-Aid on it and do this and do that and try to fix it. And then when they can't, then in desperation they ask God to finish it. And so when we keep all this in context, one, God knows what we have need of before we sometimes even ourselves know. But once we're capable of comprehending the things that we have need of, then God wants us to ask in faith, wants us to be faithful in those things, to ask, And sometimes, He wants, to see, how sincere we are about it. So we may have to ask more than once and to seek. Asking's one thing, seeking's another, isn't it? Sometimes people will say, well, I really would like, and you can fill in the blank with whatever you want, but it's like, well, I'd have to get up and I'd have to get dressed and I'd have to get in the car and I'd have to, they, if it was there, they would ask for it. There's something that they want, but are they willing to seek it out? Are they willing to put forth the effort? Somebody just drops it in their lap, they would take it. But on the other hand, if they've got to put effort into it, over the years I've heard, people say, would you like a mess of beans? Would you like some corn, whatever? And everybody's like, yes. Well, just go down to the garden and take a Kroger poke and just fill you up a bag of it. Well, no, that's different, isn't it? If you had as we say, a Kroger poke full of green beans you was giving away, well, yeah, I'll take those, especially if you've already strung them. I'd be more than proud to take that. But now, if I have to go down all those rows and I have to look for the best beans and leave the others and go through all that rigmarole, I don't know. I'm willing to ask, but I'm not necessarily willing to do the seeking. And then there is that idea of a persistence in all of those things, where we knock and we keep on knocking. And Jesus even speaks some parables about someone who, in the middle of the night, they have visitors that come and they weren't prepared for that and they don't have anything. So they go to their neighbor and they begin knocking on the door in the middle of the night, and they've settled in for the evening. And Jesus says, well, I tell you, He will get up and He'll give you the things that you're asking for. Not because necessarily you're a good neighbor or He likes you, but because of the persistence. I'm not going to get any sleep if you keep banging on the door. And so there's that persistence. There's the persistence that Jesus talked about in the woman and the unjust judge. And so all of this, Jesus is preparing His disciples for the kingdom and the things of the kingdom. And so those who are within that framework that we have in the Scriptures, that are operating within that, then again, if we ask things according to His will, and He already knows that we have need of those things, then again, He is willing to assist us, provide for us the things that we have need of. And His comparison here in verse 11 is, if ye then being evil, now that's not necessarily meaning that we're exceedingly wicked, evil in that sense, but we have our moments, and so if we, who again may or may not always respond to requests, if we know to do good for our children, whether or not we're good neighbors, whether or not Jesus assumes that we're going to try to provide for our family and our children. Now, sadly today, that's not the case. Sometimes people today seem to care less about their kids, and they really don't have a sense. But again, Jesus isn't necessarily talking about people who don't care, but He's talking about adults who are good parents, concerned about their children. And so if we know, here again, as a parent, it's kind of hard to discuss this, but again, there was a time when jeans weren't supposed to have holes in them. And so, when, and I'm sure most of y'all were the same, when school started, we went to Sears and we got 5 outfits, and we were supposed to wear those 5 outfits one day a week. When you come in, you took your school clothes off, put your play clothes on. But still, in the course of the year, your shoes began to wear. Back when you wore the Converse tennis shoes, and they were made out of just some canvas and rubber, and your toe started sticking out the side of it, or the heel or the sole was flapping in it. Again, the jeans started getting a hole in it. Your jacket was looking a little. You think your mom and dad knew that? You think it surprised them that your shoes were wearing, or that your school clothes weren't looking maybe as nice as they used to? Good parents would already know that, wouldn't they? Good parents would know that when the children come home from school and the family comes together in the evening, what's one of the things we usually take care of? When everybody comes home from work and school, they're going to be hungry, aren't they? I mean, the school may take care of breakfast and they may take care of lunch now. But again, we all understand that when the family comes home, when mom and dad's home, the kids are home, I mean, at least common sense says, we got to eat. And so, go in and tell mom, I'm hungry. And she'll say, well, supper will be ready when dad gets home. And it's like, yeah, but I'm hungry now. And then occasionally there was like, well, then get you a cookie or get you a glass of milk or do something and, basically get out from under her feet till she got supper ready. We'll eat like we always do. So our parents know that we have need of certain things. They know that we need our clothes washed. They know that we need clothes, and they know when our shoes are looking a little scuffed up and a little ratty. All of those things are there, and that's what Jesus says. Parents know things. They may not be able to, today, we're going to have to get some shoes for him before long. I mean, they may be talking about it and they may know about it, but they may not going to go get it today. But then you come home from school and you say, the sole came loose on my tennis shoe today, think we could, maybe get some new shoes this weekend or whatever. And your parents say, well, we can probably do that. We'll do that. They already knew. They already knew. And that's what Jesus is saying. Good parents already know. And if good parents, and we use that word good, put that in quotation marks, but again, Jesus says if we being evil, subject to sin, if we still have the ability to comprehend and to know, and that God knows too. And so that's why Jesus says that in this group who are the children of God, your heavenly Father, he uses that term in verse 11. How much more shall your heavenly, or your Father who is in heaven, give good things to them that ask him? And again, going back and preceding these things, if the grass of the field versus Solomon and his attire, the birds of the air, they have nests, all of this. And so if he knows how to take care, and he knows that they need taken care of, then he also knows that of us. And so it's just a matter of thinking about God's will and taking his will into consideration when we ask, and then we pursue that. sometimes we may still have to put feet on our prayers. We may ask for something, but it's going to require that we put forth at least some effort to see it through. And so it's not just that we ask for something and automatically it just materializes there in front of us. But again, we seek, we knock, we are persistent in those things and trying to do the will of God. And God will, again, meet us more than halfway when it comes to that. Anybody have any questions or comments or anything on that part?
8 out of 10 you want.
Do what?
8 out of 10 of your wants is more than what you need.
Yeah. And it's important that, my dad, sometimes I'd say, Dad, I want, and you know what the answer, many of y'all probably heard it too. You're old enough to know your wants won't hurt you. That's what he would always tell me. Now again, if it had to do with shoes, my dad got frustrated, especially with shoes, because my feet kept growing. I went from like a size 7 shoe to size 12 by the time I graduated, and he threatened just to get the shoe boxes and make me wear those. But he was, he even though he was sometimes a little upset about the fact that we just bought you new shoes. Didn't we just get you new shoes? Well, they don't fit. And so again, wants, just as Paul said, our wants, if we can have the things that we want, that's wonderful if it's within the framework. But at the same time, we need to put emphasis on the need. And if we look around us, we see that, if people behave as they should, most people's needs are going to be met. They're going to have clothes, they're going to have food, they'll have a place to stay, if that's what they want. Now again, some people go off the rail, and so again, they want something, one thing more than what they need. And so if they want something worse than something that they need, and they trade what they need for what they want, then that's going to be an issue. It's a good point. As we finish up here this evening, we're going to look at Matthew 7:12, and it's also repeated in Luke 6:31, and that's the golden rule, as we have heard it referred to. And this is connected. The reason we're going to do these together is because this is somewhat connected to the preceding verses that have to do with asking, seeking, knocking, prayer, knowing the difference between your needs and your wants, and doing the right thing. And in this particular verse, it says, "All things, therefore, whatsoever ye would that men should do to you, you even so do ye also." Or as, again, "For this is the law and the prophets." Of course, Jesus was asked once, in at least in Matthew 22, what was the greatest commandment, and he talked about loving the Lord thy God, and the second was like that, to love thy neighbor as thyself. And so when Jesus says here, "For this is the law and the prophets," again, if you're trying to sum up how you ought to behave, Jesus says, "Then whatsoever you would that people do to you, do likewise." And that sort of sums up the idea of love your neighbor as yourself. If you don't want them stealing from you, don't you steal from them. If you want them to be friendly to you, you be friendly to them. And so this golden rule, as it's come to be known, it precedes with this word, therefore. And if we go back into the preceding verses to what we were looking at, it says, if ye then, being evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more shall your Father who is in heaven give good things unto them that ask him? Therefore, that's where we're at when we get down to this other. All things, therefore, based on, you being evil, know how to give good things to your children, you know what you're supposed to be doing. Again, therefore, based upon that premise that we just was looking at, I mean, you wouldn't, if your neighbor asked for a fish, you wouldn't give him a serpent. If he was hungry and asked for some bread, again, you wouldn't give him a rock. And so, likewise, or therefore, whatsoever you would that men should do unto you, even so you do also unto them likewise. It's kind of amazing, but when you think about what Jesus said, life seems so easy. I mean, we ought to love God with all our heart, with all of our mind, with all of our soul, with all of our strength. That if you believe in God, that makes sense. And again, to love your neighbor as yourself, that's, if you want people to treat you well, treat them well. That seems pretty simple, doesn't it? That's those three concepts. It's not like you have to have some great higher learning or education to comprehend that. How wonderful it would be if it just those little principles, the Old Testament, that's a big book and it's got a lot of stuff in it. And, I've tried to read through Ezekiel and I've looked at Isaiah. I get so confused, in all of that. Just love God. Again, love your neighbor as yourself. The way that you want to be treated, treat people that way. And that pretty much takes care of the law and the prophets. And if you move it over to the New Testament, it pretty much takes care of all that too. It's not brain surgery. Why can't we do that? It's that part that Jesus mentions preceding, if ye being evil. That's the thing. It's the evil that lurks in the hearts of men and women that keeps us from doing that. We don't want people to I don't want you to tell me what to do. I don't need your help. And people, they twist all of this and they go way out to make their lives miserable. When, throw in a couple good commandments and a golden rule, and you truly are golden. If you spend a little time thinking about that, then, you don't have to know what the Old Testament says about this. If your enemy's hungry, feed him. That's even what Paul said in Romans 12. If your enemy is hungry, feed him, and you'll heap coals of fire on his head. Maybe you'll win them over, but maybe you won't. But it's much better when we can go that route. And so if we know what's good for our children and we see others who have those same kind of needs, maybe we're the ones who can help fulfill that, and maybe we're the answers to somebody's prayer. A lot of times I don't think Christians appreciate the fact that sometimes we're the answers to other people's prayers. You know, and again, I'm just going to use a couple examples, but you know the young couple down the street that are kind of struggling along, you know, and if somebody, again, takes them some groceries or takes a pack of diapers, you know, they're struggling, and again, if they're people of faith, they're praying to God, wanting, you know, some kind of help. You know, we need help, we're struggling. You know, we may be the answer to the prayer with the pack of diapers, the gallon of milk. You know, for the widow lady who can't get her yard mowed, you know, wonders, you know, I can't afford to pay somebody $40 a week to mow my yard. Praying to God, you know, I'm going to get in trouble with the city, you know, they're going to fine me because my yard's going to get high. And again, you know, do I give up some of my medicine? Do I give up some of my food? What do I do? Because that's a lot of money every week for 10 months, 8 months, whatever out of the year. And so there's just a lot of ways in which not only we think about our prayers, but how we can be the answer to some other people's prayers too. You know, using what Jesus is saying is, I know that if I was in that situation, I would appreciate if somebody would do this. And we do that a little bit when somebody passes away. You know, we'll take some food to the family, and here's the sad note on that. They get overrun with food. They can't really, they can't eat it all, and you know, they're looking for somebody to eat it with them. But then 4, 5, 6 days later, everybody goes on with their life, and they're still stuck there trying to get through that. They sure could use one of those casseroles tonight that they couldn't figure out what to do with, you know, last week. You know, they could like someone to sit and talk a few things through with. You know, last week there was 50 people in the house, and there was so much talking going on, you know, you couldn't hear your own self think. And now this week it's so quiet. And so again, not only should we think about our prayers, but as Christians sometimes think about how we can be the answers to others' prayers. It's interesting that Brother McGarvey brings up a point, and I had read this several years ago, especially from Hillel, who there's a list down here: Socrates, Buddha, Confucius, and then Hillel. Hillel was one of the Jewish teachers. He had a school, and he taught rabbis about the law and the interpretation of the law and application of the law. And his view was a little bit different from Jesus, and actually some people say Jesus borrowed this from him. I don't know if that's necessarily the case, but Hillel taught, do not do to others what you would not have done to you. And so it's kind of a negative side of that. Don't do to other people what you don't want them to do to you. Well, the way that's worded is worded in a negative sense. Just don't do. Don't do. Jesus, on the other hand, says do. Don't do what you wouldn't do, but do what you would want others to do to you. Hillel says, you know, if you can't, some people say if you can't say anything good, don't say anything at all. And, you know, if you can't, if you're not going to help, then get out of the way. You know, that's kind of the view a lot of people has. You know, if you're going to just be in the way, leave. And so, you know, don't get in the way. But on the other hand, Jesus doesn't say don't do these things, but Jesus says be the person that is active, get involved, do to others what you would have them do for you. And someday you may actually need them to do just that. I'm sure people have heard stories, and again, someone has done a good deed for someone. Maybe they don't even remember after time having done it, but years later that person shows up to do something because you helped them when they were in need. I just want to pay that back. And so it takes many different forms, but this golden rule is something that Jesus wanted the church to know and to understand and to hold to. Does anybody have any questions or comments down through that? Our time's
I was
up.
reading that Job there said that God is perfect in knowledge. He knows everything.
Yeah. He knows, and so we need to be a little bit more active in our knowing and our thinking, and there's a lot there we discussed tonight, but knowing the difference between our needs and our wants and other people's needs, and how it is that again we can be good neighbors and that we can keep the golden rule.
In closing this evening, we wish to thank you again for spending your time and study with us. We hope the lesson has been uplifting and motivational. We encourage you to return again for our next lesson. Until then, may we invite you to visit our website. You will find many study opportunities. Our resource page has links to the Gospel Broadcasting Network, a 24/7 station with many great Christian programs and speakers. In Search of the Lord's Way, with Brother Phil Sanders. We have 2 links for Bibles and downloadable software. If you are looking to really expand your knowledge, perhaps you might like to try World Video Bible School, a college-level learning site free of charge. So, until next time, may God bless and keep you in His care as we walk together in His truth. And remember, as always, the churches of Christ salute you.